Hey everyone, welcome.
Hello. Small group today.
So, I think we're just trying to find the agenda. I've got too many tabs. Cool. So, welcome everyone. 20th March. There are a couple of things in the announcements, but I did just want to particularly highlight we have a few people out today, and so please do make sure to use the release management escalation process if needed. Ahmad's very, very kindly stepped in, helping Vladimir, and Steve, you'll be taking on. We are on the day 20th, so we do have quite a few release management tasks to make sure we definitely get through today. We want to make sure we complete those. So please do ask early if you need any help. Awesome. So we have got an item on the agenda, but Dov is not on this call. I don't see the link. Do you want to maybe just kick us off, Sam, in the interest of time?
Yeah, sure. Just gonna ping him, see how we're doing. Yeah, so Dove is doing a lot of stuff around release pipelines and pipeline authoring, right? They have, I've sent him the link with the passcode. That's why, because we have several different links in that doc, don't we? Anyway, because pipeline authoring have a number of features planned for kind of their 6 to 12 month roadmap, including what they're kind of billing as CI components. And the CI components particularly are their take on completely reusable components that you can plug into workflows in a similar way to what we've seen coming out of GitHub Actions in the past kind of 12 to 18 months that will help organizations have, pre-configured pipeline pieces that you can just slot in and should be, idempotent in the way that they work, and you're able to use them. I think we're just seeing Dove jump in. I don't know if that was a fair explanation, if you caught any of that.
Just a little bit, just at the end, and I think it's it's what we're aiming. We still have a long way until we'll get there, but we are. I can start the presentation, but basically, we are adding incremental value in every release. So yes, as our end goal will be to do exactly what you just mentioned. In every iteration, we'll add like more and more values, and eventually we'll get to a state when we'll have like a reusable piece of configuration that basically could be plugged into any pipeline. But with that said, maybe I'll just like start the presentation, unless there are any other items at the beginning of the agenda that you want to cover.
No, we're up to your point, so go ahead.
Okay, cool. Okay, so hi everyone, Dov Hershkovitz, Senior Product Manager of the Pipeline Authoring team. I'm going to share the slide deck. I'm going to quickly go through it, and I'm going to show you some examples, but I really want to make sure that I'm here also to like answer any questions and see if we can collaborate further on this project. Basically, I want to show you what we are planning to achieve. CI/CD components catalog, it's a solution, but as we get into that solution, eventually, as I mentioned, in every release, in every iteration, we'll be able to provide meaningful value for our users. And I really hope that many teams in GitLab will be able to start adopting those capabilities, those set of capabilities that we'll release, and we can work closely to get like a closer feedback loop, and we can implement features that you would like us to, like internally in GitLab, that you would like us to implement. Of course, we are going to release it to all of our customers, so we'll get also feedback from there. But obviously, like in getting internal feedback is much more quicker than reaching out to customers. Basically, we'll cover the background, the path to monetization, what's the components in catalog, user value, and our roadmap. So basically, a little bit about maybe the problem. We know already, and we identified that before anyone creates any pipeline, it's very hard to understand what is out there, what is there out there for them to use. Then they find themselves either going to Google or maybe searching something within the organization on some repos. But overall, what they are doing is they are reinventing the wheel over and over again when they start writing a pipeline. Now we have this concept of CI templates that obviously everyone is using, but we also acknowledge that templates are not designed with the reusability in mind. Okay, it's like a scaffolding. You start with some sort of a starting point, and then you own that template, and you extend it, and you add like hidden job, and you extend the jobs. So eventually, a lot of the logic will actually go into the template, and eventually the template will go bigger and bigger and bigger. It's not a bad thing. I mean, the templates are really good, but I think we are at a place when we are saying, okay, there is like a natural evolution that we can take the templates. The templates are not going away. They are going to stay. What we are adding is capabilities on top of those templates that eventually will move them to something that we like to call as CI components. So just briefly about the goal. The goal is to create some sort of a framework, some sort of an ecosystem at GitLab that will allow users to easily share code with others and to collaborate quickly. Eventually, we want to make sure the developers focus on sort of innovation, and everything that is related to configuring a pipeline is something that you will do once, and that's it. You won't need to redo it over and over again. The path to the ultimate feature, or maybe path to monetization, but actually it's like the natural evolution, as I mentioned, the way I see it, is we have now templates, and the idea is that more and more users will start convert templates into a component, okay? And the component is the reusable unit of pipeline configuration. It's very similar to a template, but we've added, as I mentioned, more and more things around that. So there is also some sort of a hybrid approach. You see it soon that even without the component, you can still use many of the elements that we implement into a component, so you can use it in the template. So there is like some sort of an evolution. You have template, you can have like some sort of a hybrid approach. Then if you like, you move it to components. And then eventually we want to release something that we like to call like a namespace catalog, or a namespace component catalog. We are not settled on the name, but basically it will be the collection of all the projects that is scoped per namespace that contain component. Basically think about like an index page or a catalog that will provide you an easy way to search, to filter, and to view what are the available components, what are the instructions, and how to use it. It's like some sort of a self-service approach to consume CI component. Think about GitHub Marketplace, but for organizations. Think about Circle CI Orbs, but for organizations. And of course, if you have any questions, like feel free to stop me in the middle and ask. Okay, so what's a component? So as I mentioned, a component is a reusable single-purpose building block. And basically, it will be a part of your pipeline configuration. And every component will have an input and a content. We also want the component to have an output. I really want to, hold on. I want to exit this presentation. I want to actually dive into the blueprint so I can show you some examples on how a component is used. So as I mentioned, a component will have input parameters, okay? And those are all the options, different inputs that we'll have. Obviously, incrementally. We won't have all of them at the beginning, but let's break it down. At the beginning of each component, users will specify a spec input, and then they will specify the list of inputs that this component could receive. So by default, all inputs that we are declaring are mandatory. It means that if you don't use them when you run the component, it will fail. But you can also have like optional. If you give them a value, some sort of a value, then they become an optional input. Today, by the way, I guess like if you're using templates, you're using variables, and there is a problem with variables because variables is like it's a global keyword. It is affecting the entire pipeline, so it's very hard to make sure that the variable will only be part of the template. So the idea with inputs is that inputs are only related or only attached to that component. So whenever you declare an input, it's an input that is running in the context of the component, only for that component. And there are like different variations that we want to have, like a default one, a required input, a default input, multiple options, and more. And we have like a full epic where we are saying, okay, in this iteration we'll add options, then maybe regular expression, inputs data input validation. For instance, I want to declare an input that will be like a Boolean, a string, a number. So we can definitely do that. And then we have the content, the actual content. The content is similar to the component. It's similar to any type of CI configuration that we have, but we do have a way, and I'll go back to the presentation. When we are using the content, when we are writing the content, we are doing an input interpolation, meaning that every key and every value in that component could be replaced by an input. So think about if you're familiar with variable expansion. So you declare a variable and then you use that variable within the template. But as you probably know, there are some fields that support variable expansion. There are some fields that does not support variable expansion. Here with inputs, everything will be supported. So ideally, you can replace any key or any value with any input parameter that you want, and then you can use it when you call that component, similar to a function. And how do you so, and this is like an example. So I have like the spec inputs and I have an environment. This is my input, an environment which can receive, for instance, this is an example, only test, staging, or production. Okay, and in the content, you can see that this is the job name, and then there is a script, and there is another job name, and there is a script, and here this script, for instance, this field is being replaced by the input that will be used here, and we can use it with rules, and basically we can use it anywhere we want inside that component. The way to use it is that when we do an include of the component, okay? And this is like the first thing is that, as you can see, we will support version control. So if you have different versions of the same component, you can call that specific version of the component. And then you do it with the inputs that you want to run. So here, this is where you will fill the input parameter that you want to pass. So you create the component once, and then you can run it many, many times with different inputs, different types of inputs. Let's see if I have more examples.
Just to sort of flip this around the other way, Doc, like I'm wondering, is this like a totally new thing that ideally we would now create a roadmap to begin dog fooding? Is that kind of what you're looking for?
I'll talk about it at the end, because like a little bit of that, but I think that there is like a really nice way for you eventually. Yes, okay, but I think there is like many benefits and an easy way for you to start adopting it from day one.
Just because I was going to say, like, I wonder if with this time it might be that a nice conversation to have, like, as a discussion about, do we have ideas of components or pipelines we can use, and then if we can think of those, we can come back and sort of watch this, how we would apply that as a more of an async.
Okay. I just wanna explain like what, you know what, I'll go over the release, because I wanted to explain the entire roadmap, and then I want to go over the release plan that we have. Release plan. Just to explain why I think this is something that users would, or not only users, like many teams in GitLab could start dogfooding it. As I mentioned, we are talking about moving into component, but before we will release a component, we want to allow anyone basically that is using today GitLab and using templates to specify. So in the first iteration, we are going to ask users, because we kind of understand that, like, now asking everyone that is using templates, convert your templates to components. Okay, this is not a fair ask, because okay, what's in it for me? Like, what is the benefit? And I think the first phase is we want to allow any includable file to use an input. Okay, so it doesn't matter if you're using, you don't need to use component in order to specify input. So the spec input that I just show will work today with templates. Okay, because the idea is that as you move from templates to component, we want to give you like an easy bridge, an easy way to migrate. And I think that the first that I would like to ask anyone, basically, if you are using templates, and I assume that you are using templates, and if you are passing parameters to a template using variables, now think about, instead of doing that, declaring input at the beginning of a template, and then use the template with those inputs. So basically what I would ask from what I'm asking for everything, okay, is to do exactly that. Like, look at your templates. The ask is not to convert it into a component. Just the templates that you're using it with variables. Try to think about, okay, how can you use now inputs instead? Okay, and this is what we want like other teams in GitLab to do. Is it like something that resonates within that team? Something that you think would be beneficial?
Does anyone know? Are we already using templates?
We use some of the basic templates, like around security scanning and such. We're using a lot of YAML anchors and such, like some of the awkward features of building a YAML configuration for CI in a wide array of places where templates are probably more suitable. We just never explored or move that direction. Part of that being that we leverage JSONet to build some of our pipelines, not all of them, obviously. And JSONet kind of abstracts some of that away for us, preventing the need for us to leverage templates to some extent. I know I'm stretching the definition of all that a little bit, but like our deployer is one key example where everything is pretty much the same for every stage in every environment, except for the name production or except for the name staging. But the entire pipeline looks almost identical. So something like that would be a perfect opportunity for a template. We just don't leverage it.
Okay. What about
Terraform,
using some of the Terraform templates that we have today for the configure team, that the configure team is creating?
The only one that I know of is the security stuff, like the default container and dependency scanners that we've got. That's the ones I know that we use.
And has that been, I think it's fair to say that's been a time constraint mainly that has stopped us moving on to the templates, right? And that what we have does serve us relatively well, given that the pipelines are fairly similar.
I would agree with that. I don't think we've ever prioritized trying to move to a template-based configuration.
I think some of this as well fits in with some of the maybe like the future plans we've had. Because I think some of the things around our pipelines is it's one pipeline and it's just been there and it just works. So sort of we haven't prioritized go change it because it's working. But actually, as we go into the sort of future stuff, so the work Graham's doing right now with the release environments, possibly as we independent deployment blueprint, we have a big idea, which is much more about, in order to solve this problem, we would have new pipelines. We would need to create a lot more pipelines. And at that point, templating becomes really useful because we're probably creating lots of new similar pipelines. Whereas I think as it is today, we more or less just have one fairly long-lived static pipeline.
That's fair enough. Do you know when will you start like designing those templates or creating those?
I think it's reasonably long term. We've got it under our sort of long term roadmap. There may be some things beforehand, so I think this will be certainly is a good one, definitely for us to keep in mind. Like Skarbek, you're sort of the thinking you're doing at the moment about the QA tests on Kubernetes. That right now feels like a possible point where we should consider if this is helpful for us, but it feels like it sits more closely with the independent deployments blueprint, which is probably next year earliest.
Okay.
It might
anything that you think might benefit from that. But as I mentioned, if you have like the same, even if you have the same template, the same pipeline, but with different environment name, for instance, this is definitely something you can just like, call that same pipeline with and just templatize the name of the template. Like anything that you can do in order to try, use it, and also like provide us with feedback by saying, hey, like that's great, but if you had like, I don't know, this feature, this addition, or could you support like with that variation? This is definitely something that we can prioritize because we are really at the beginning of like launching that, and we are really want that feedback because it will take time until users will adopt that features. It will take time until we get feedback from that. So getting like internal feedback will be super useful, even if it's just something very minimal.
That makes sense. Okay, well, we have an epic where we keep track of these dog fooding ideas, and also met with Graham, who's not on the call, but working on release environments. We'll see if there's the pieces of that we can combine in so that we can start picking this up.
Sounds good. We have an issue about dog fooding, and it's actually at the end of the presentation, I think. And if not, I linked it in
We've got it linked in the notes by the looks of it.
Yeah, in the notes. So like basically, if you want to also link like that dog fooding issue, even as a comment in one of the issues, so we can track it down. You mentioned that you are using the scanners, so we also going to like, we want to convert like all the scanners that we have, secret detection, the code quality, the performance, all the templates basically. Eventually, I see them converted into a component. So eventually, in one way or another, everyone will either use like a component, or you use the template with an input instead of variables. So I really see this as something that we,
The security scanners specifically, does that, because we've done a number of updates and deprecations around those and how we roll them out, are those going to be a kind of, managed component where breaking changes happen in the background, and the impact to a team like the delivery group is you change from version 1 to version 2 and then you're done?
Exactly. You can, but this is something that will come with only with components. So this is like a value that you'll get from a component. Template, you'll still do like, if you use template, you still do like an include template, but usually if you go, like if you want to configure some sort of an analyzer, so you need to pass variables, different variables. So instead of that, we'll convert them into inputs, okay? But then eventually we'll move them into a component. And when we'll move them into a component, and moving, like if you already took a template and add an input to that, you've done most of the work, okay? Because this is the majority of the work. Then all you need is just like give it like a name, add a README, and this is more or less what we need. There is like a specific file structure that we need to place the component and some naming convention, but the majority of the work is just like looking at the template and convert it from variables to input. And then when you do that, when you will call that template/component, you can actually peg it with a version. So you can either go for the latest, and you always take the latest, or you can peg to a specific version. You say, I want like V1, and it will always be V1, no matter how many changes would be. Like first, we will have like a full version control.
I have a question regarding that, actually. So when you said versioning, does this versioning mean tagging on a repository where you store this component, or is basically tag of the Docker image or something?
No, it's tagging of the repository.
And the reason I'm asking is that multiple components might require a different execution environments, for example, like these scanners, right? So they require to have some special tooling installed on the Docker, like where this component actually run, where this scanner actually run. And if you just include the versioning and tags in the repository, there is a chance that this component might have some executables or some tooling that is not present on the current runner. That's the reason why, for example, GitHub has those actions built not only by, on the tags from the repository, but also from Docker images. So you just specify the Docker image tag because component might have something that some application that requires to run this component.
Yeah, I think what you're saying is fair. I have like two things to mention. First of all, a component with a repository, you can have like a repository with multiple components and multiple dependencies. We can have like a component like one per one, depends on the way you want to structure. But I think what you just mentioned is more of like what we would like to call a step. And a step is something that it's further here and it doesn't have like a priority. The timeline is, I'm not sure about the timeline, but basically we want to introduce a step, and a step is exactly an action. This is like just what the runner is doing. It will need to involve like the runner team, but we're starting with a template, but eventually we'll also get into steps. I haven't gone into that because we didn't break it down, but the idea is even you'll be able to take like an action from GitHub action, and you'll be able to convert it into a step, and you'll be able to run it in our runner. This, like, think about steps as the same as actions, but it's not something we'll be able to see. It's like 16.3 question mark, maybe toward the second half of this year, maybe the beginning of next year. It really depends on the way we move, how fast we move with the component of the private catalog. But it's definitely.
Then I honestly don't understand what component is then. Because as you described, component has some inputs, right? And then has some execution part. And then you expect this execution part based on the inputs to run this execution part. But if you have, I don't know, like, for example, decrypt some values, and this is component that decrypt the values from the repository, and that component required to have, I don't know, like Vault client. And if you have a component like YAML and you have inputs and you declare it in the repository, but you don't have Vault client within your environment execution, then how you
it will not
run
work,
it?
basically. You won't be able to run it. But I think we probably need to discuss this further, but I would say that this is like some sort of a mandatory, is it like a mandatory input, or maybe we need to have like something else as like some sort of a mandatory parameter
and the reason I mentioned GitHub Actions because GitHub Actions are actually, they are kind of shareable. They can be like open sourced, right? And you write an action and you pack everything in a Docker file, and you publish this action as a Docker image, and you use it. And whatever you have installed on your runner, it doesn't matter because GitHub Action unpack this Docker file, Docker image, and run within the Docker container. So, and kind of, I see some technical difficulties with this, honestly.
Is there an issue that we can take that to? Just on the interest of time, I want to move on to some of the release management tasks, but it sounds like a great thought that you're having there, Vladimir. So it's obvious there's somewhere useful that Vladimir can document that.
Yes, so I can find the issue within the epic about steps, and we can continue the discussion there.
Awesome, that's great. Thanks for bringing this one up, Dov. So what I'll do is I'll link it onto our dog fooding epic, and then for everyone else, like if you are using pipelines or thinking about creating new pipelines, please consider whether we can make use of some of this stuff. Cool.
Thanks
I want
a lot.
to jump to release management. Ahmad, I see you're having fun with some tagging. So how are you getting on? Do we need to do a bit of would it be useful to make use of everyone on this call to go through anything?
I just retry the tagging because it failed. So I'm checking if it's gonna fail again. Yeah, I think I will ask for some help then if it fails again. But so far so good.
Awesome. Fingers crossed on this one. Awesome. Are there any other discussion that people want to bring up before we jump into the metrics? No? Okay, so Steve, it's gonna be on you today. So
yep. All right, let me get my screen shared here. Okay. So last week there were a few incidents that we can see. We actually had one go over the weekend into the beginning of last week, and the one or two incidents that kind of took up some time, it was pretty much we resolved through the day, but then the package wasn't going to get the new the revert or the fix until the next day. So it was pretty much like we got things moving, and then the next shift kind of was able to finally get the package in, and that's the same thing that we saw that happened here. So that's kind of where we see this increase in not promoted packages, because we were truly blocked until we had a package with the revert in place. These two are a bit more minor. They were blocking, but not in a way that really caused any problems. They were not long enough to really cause any issues. And then I marked a few QA failures here just as single one-offs, because they were happening quite a bit earlier in the week. So I started to mark them, and actually at the end I'll probably ask everyone about what you think about how we track some of those. And then jumping over to the deployment frequencies. So I guess over the last 90 days, we do see that this last week was a bit lower than the average. And I think that's due to starting off with an incident and then having one or two midweek that kind of just slowed things up. So we couldn't get more than 2 packages out per shift for the most part. There's the zoomed in view. And then looking at the lead time for changes, this fits our standard pattern where we see it bump up over the weekend, and then we come back down to our standard level before the weekend again. If we look at the deployment blockers, there's a handful of issues here that blocked us. So the main one was the QA failures. So that kind of happened at the end of the EMEA time zone. And what ended up happening was it didn't really get raised up to being an incident until a few hours later. And then it was kind of like, okay, now we have to wait for quality to get involved and get the revert going. And so even though like there were ongoing deployments at the beginning, it slowed down all of the upcoming packages and then eventually caused a larger delay. And so even though like during this 10 or 12 hour period, we had a package go out, we were technically blocked through that whole time because nothing else was progressing forward. I did have a question because this one originally was opened as a release tasks issue and then turned into an incident once it was blocking deployments. This is essentially how we track it, where we just, put the hours in the incident so we don't end up with doubled hours.
It doesn't matter really. You can even just leave it off the table completely, as long as we have a record where we actually track the total number. Then it doesn't matter too much how we have it. But yeah, having it as zeros is totally fine as well. Okay.
And then I know that 1 or 2 of these other incidents weren't like explicitly blocking deployments, but there was 1 or 2 of them that it was kind of like more of a safety. We didn't want to, risk at all introducing anything new while those were getting resolved. So those just included a few extra hours for each of those. On the topic of QA failures, though, I was curious because as I worked through the run book, because this happened a few times before we really got blocked. So if we look at the run book, so anytime there's like a flaky failure, for example, like it does say that when a job fails, create an issue on the release tracker. And so that, even if we just retry it and it succeeds, it seems like we should create an issue. I dug in a little bit further into, following the steps of the deployment or deploy failures runbook. And it says that if you can't resolve it within 5 minutes, you should open an issue on the release tracker. And so I was curious because most of the time to just retry a QA failure is going to take more than 5 minutes. Should we be tracking every single QA failure, even if it succeeds after the first retry? Or is that something?
Let me give you my idealistic view, and then everyone else can wade in with a realistic view. So I would love to see these things tracked simply so that we can go back to quality and actually be able to say, like, hey, last week we had 10 things, right? However, I am aware that it creates an overhead for us and it's not always realistic. So you can use your discretion on that one. But I think quality are doing a great job of seeing a lot of these failures now, maybe more so than some of our times in the past. So perhaps it's a little less urgent. But at the same time, I think as much as we can make the delays and pain that we're experiencing more visible, the easier it is for other people to actually go, okay, that's a real problem, let me go fix it. So that's kind of the intention behind all of these metrics. But I'll let other people wade in because I know it is a little bit down to how you manage your workload and how you how all that gets handled.
And my main thought, what I was thinking with this topic was if we did want to open an issue for every failure, we can just set that up in CI to automatically open the issue. Please and then if it succeeds on retry, then you just click close.
Yeah, please do.
So that was pretty much my main idea was if we wanted to track it, we could automate that. But I know quality also has automated issues open when they have failures. Don't necessarily want to duplicate.
And we may want to use those as well, but I do think it's useful for us to be able to one thing we do, and we're going to do a lot more of, is pointing out to people that, hey, like last week we had this number of deployment delays. it's certainly useful for people to be able to see the different types of those things. Some of them are QA, some of them are incident or other. But yeah, if there's an easy way to help do that, then please go ahead, automate it or make use of something that exists already. Whichever is better.
Cool. I'll open an issue for that.
Awesome. Let's start, Steve. Also, one observation, I'm going to move on rapidly in a sec because we're running quite late, but for the next release managers, so Vladimir and Myra, who will probably watch the recording, it does look like for a week like last week, certainly we're creating a lot more packages than we end up using. So do consider whether when we adjust the release manager schedule, you may not want to go at the frequency we have been going at. It may be worth considering whether we like increase the time between package tagging and produce just a few, like one less package or a couple less packages each day.
I think the main reason we dropped so many packages it was incidents, I think.
Yeah, there's incidents in the QA failures because a lot of
Yeah,
times
yeah.
it would fail and then you'd retry it and it would work, but you might not notice to retry until an hour later, and then that throws the whole schedule back an hour. So then suddenly that package might get wasted.
It's really just for your
pattern.
workload, as it's much harder to keep track of things when you've got chat ops pinging you every 5 minutes for packages you're not going to deploy. So do consider reining that in a little if you need to. Cool. Before we move on, Ahmad, do you need help with that new failure?
Yes, that would be nice.
Should we just do it together as a group? Since
Sure.
I think this might be new for a lot of people. So
Share the
Ruben,
screen.
Scarbeck, going to be leaning on you too.
So there is this error server responded with 400. I think it cannot find the tag in this repository, the false repository.
I think what's happening here is it searches for an existing tag first, and then if it cannot find the tag, it tries to create the tag. So
Okay.
that first 404 is fine. The second 400, that's the problem. And
This one here.
yeah. The last line in GitLab client HTTP party. So the reason that 400 is happening, I think, is because of the way we are passing the message when calling the tag API. Do people want to see what the problem is? I've got an MR that I can create now.
Yeah,
Should I
let's go
just
for
create
it.
the MR or?
Sure.
Okay.
Will you share the screen? Or should I share the screen? Or
Oh, sorry. Was I supposed to be sharing the screen?
or
1 second.
I'm not. It's okay.
So I think this is the problem. Just waiting for it to load. So this is not supposed to be a keyword argument. I think that's what the problem is. earlier we were calling a different method here, find or create tag, and that was one of our methods. So that was taking message as a keyword argument. But now we're calling create tag, which is something that's provided by a gem. So it doesn't take message as a argument like this. So I think this should fix it. If anyone can review and merge, then we can retry the chatops command.
Sure.
Did we change that recently?
Yeah, this was
Yeah,
changed
we
recently.
did. Yeah.
Okay, we can move further. Like I can retry after the merge
Go for it.
happens, and yeah. So
Cool. Fingers crossed. Shout if it doesn't, right?
thank you all.
Yeah, thanks, Ruben. Cool. Shall we? So we are running quite over time. If anyone needs to drop or wants to drop, please just go for it. Otherwise, I'll stop this recording and we can jump to some other stuff.